My daughter announced her 8th pregnancy, standing there in my doorway with that same expectant look I'd seen 7 times before, then casually asked for another $2,000. The words hit me like ice water. Something inside me cracked. Before I dive into this, I need to share something with you, something personal that I've kept buried for far too long. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt used by the people you love most, would you consider leaving a like and subscribing? These stories need to reach people who are struggling in silence, people who think they're alone in this. Your support helps me share these truths with others who desperately need to hear them. I was standing in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, the autumn light streaming through the window above the sink, illuminating the worn countertops I'd scrubbed 1,000 times. I was wearing my old blue cardigan, the one with the frayed cuffs that I couldn't bring myself to throw away because my late husband had always said it made my eyes look like the Chicago sky in September. My hands were submerged in dishwater, and I was staring at the reflection of my 72-year-old face in the window, wondering when exactly I'd become invisible. The knock came at 9:30. I knew it was Sarah before I even dried my hands. She had a particular rhythm to her knock, urgent yet casual, like she was doing me a favor by showing up unannounced. 3 quick raps, then a pause, then 2 more. It was the same knock she'd used since she was a teenager, sneaking home after curfew and hoping I'd let her in without a lecture. I dried my hands slowly on the dish towel, buying myself a moment. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could see her silhouette shifting from foot to foot. Impatient, always impatient. I opened the door, and there she stood, my 48-year-old daughter, her belly already showing at what I assumed was maybe 3 months along, wearing expensive yoga pants and carrying a designer purse I knew I'd helped pay for. The purse was a Coach bag, the one she'd said she desperately needed for a job interview 6 months ago, an interview that, as far as I knew, had never happened. Or maybe it had, and she just hadn't gotten the job. She'd never mentioned it again after I'd transferred the $300. "Mom," she said, not even waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. "I have wonderful news." She brushed past me, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume, another gift I'd given her last Christmas when she'd said Jake couldn't afford to buy her anything. I watched her walk into my living room like she owned it, settling onto my sofa with a familiarity that would have been comforting if it hadn't felt so presumptuous. I remember the exact pattern of light falling across the hardwood floor my husband and I had saved for years to install. Diagonal stripes that shifted as the morning progressed, golden and warm. I remember the smell of the coffee I'd brewed too strong that morning, bitter and dark, matching my mood even before I'd known why. I remember the sound of the neighbors' wind chimes through the open window, a gentle tinkling that seemed to mock the tension building in my shoulders. I remember thinking that wonderful news from Sarah usually meant expensive news for me. "I'm pregnant again," she announced, her hand resting on her belly in that practiced maternal gesture. "Number 8. Can you believe it?" I could believe it. What I couldn't believe was what came next. She didn't ask how I was, didn't comment on my house, though she must have noticed I'd stopped replacing the worn curtains in the living room, stopped buying the fresh flowers I used to keep on the coffee table. Her eyes swept over me without really seeing me, the way you might glance at a piece of furniture you've seen 1,000 times. "I'm going to need about $2,000 to get things ready. You know how it is. The other kids need new beds to make room, and there's the nursery furniture, and Jake's hours got cut again at the warehouse." The words tumbled out practiced and smooth, like she'd rehearsed them on the drive over. Maybe she had. I found myself wondering when she'd decided to come, when she'd chosen this Tuesday morning, whether she'd strategically timed it for when she thought I'd be most vulnerable, most likely to say yes. Jake. Her husband of 23 years, who seemed perpetually between jobs, perpetually unfortunate, perpetually unable to provide for the ever-growing family he kept creating. I stood there, dish towel still in my hands, and felt something I'd been pushing down for years trying to surface. "Let me think about it," I heard myself say, the words automatic, trained into me by decades of being the family's emotional and financial safety net. Sarah's smile tightened just slightly. Well, don't think too long. I need to order the furniture by Friday to get the sale price. After she left, I sat at my small kitchen table, the one where I'd fed my children, where I'd done my taxes alone after Bill died, where I'd eaten countless solitary meals, and I stared at the stack of unopened bills I'd been avoiding. Commonwealth Edison, water bill, the property tax notice that made my stomach clench every time I looked at it. The photographs on my refrigerator seemed to mock me. Sarah's 7 children, my grandchildren, arranged in chronological order like a timeline of my financial decline. Emma, now 26, Jackson, 24, the twins, Sophia and Olivia, 21, Marcus, 18, little Lily, 14, and Zoe, barely 11. Each birth had come with its own requests, its own emergencies, its own non-negotiable needs that somehow always fell on my shoulders. I pulled out my checkbook, the register showing a balance that made my chest tight. After Bill died 8 years ago, I'd had a comfortable nest egg. His life insurance, our savings, the small inheritance from his mother. Not a fortune, maybe $80,000, but enough to see me through my retirement with dignity. Now, I was looking at barely $12,000, and that was before this month's expenses. My mind drifted back, the way it always did when I felt this crushing weight. I remembered when Sarah first came to me 23 years ago, pregnant with Emma, terrified and unmarried. I'd given her $5,000 for a security deposit on an apartment. Just until Jake and I get on our feet, she'd promised. I could still see her face that day, young and scared, and so certain that this baby would be the catalyst that made Jake grow up, made him responsible, made him into the man she believed he could be. I'd believed it too. Or maybe I just wanted to believe it. Then came Jackson, 2 years later, and they needed help with medical bills. $3,000. Sarah had cried on the phone, telling me about the complicated birth, the emergency C-section, the hospital bills that insurance didn't cover. I'd felt so guilty then, sitting in my comfortable house with my reliable husband, while my daughter struggled with a new baby and mounting debt. How could I not help? The twins arrived during what Sarah called a really rough patch. I'd given her nearly $10,000 that year between hospital costs and helping them avoid eviction. That was the first time Jake had lost a job, though it wouldn't be the last. He'd been fired for attendance issues, though Sarah had insisted it was unfair, that his boss had it out for him. I'd listened to her defend him and wondered why he couldn't defend himself by simply showing up to work on time. But I hadn't said that. I'd just written the checks. With each pregnancy, each crisis, each desperate phone call, I'd opened my wallet. When had it become expected? When had my daughter's hand in my purse become as natural as breathing? I got up and walked through my small house in Lincoln Park, the neighborhood I'd called home for 47 years. We'd bought this place when the area was still affordable, when young couples like Bill and me could dream of owning a piece of Chicago. Now it was worth a fortune, but I was asset-rich and cash-poor, unable to access that wealth without selling my home, my memories, my history. The house felt too quiet. It always did. Sarah visited only when she needed something. My son, Michael, had moved to Seattle 15 years ago and called maybe once a month, perfunctory conversations where he asked if I was okay and seemed relieved when I said yes. The grandchildren came by on obligatory holidays, their eyes on their phones, counting the minutes until they could leave. I found myself in the guest room that used to be Michael's bedroom, opening the closet where I'd stored boxes of old photographs and documents. I pulled one down, the cardboard soft with age, and began sorting through memories. There was a photo of Sarah's high school graduation, her smile bright with possibility. There was her wedding to Jake, a small ceremony I'd paid for because his family couldn't contribute. There were baby pictures, birthday parties, Christmases where the pile of gifts I'd bought dwarfed everyone else's contributions combined. Beneath the photographs, I found something that made my breath catch, A folder of documents, loan papers. I'd co-signed for Sarah's car 7 years ago when her credit was too poor to qualify a loan. The car had been repossessed within a year, but the debt had remained on my credit report, a $1,000 black mark I'd eventually paid off to protect my own financial standing. There was a promissory note Sarah had signed when I'd given her $15,000 to help with a down payment on a house 4 years ago. "I'll pay you back with interest," she'd written in her looping handwriting. I'd never seen a penny of repayment. My hands trembled as I counted up the documents, the evidence of my generosity or my foolishness, depending on how you looked at it. Conservatively, I'd given Sarah over $60,000 in the past 15 years. $60,000 that had evaporated into her life while mine had contracted, shrunk, diminished to this small, quiet existence. I thought about my own mother, who'd lived her final years in a nursing home paid for by Medicaid because she'd given everything to her children and had nothing left for herself. I remembered visiting her, seeing the defeat in her eyes, and swearing I'd never end up like that. Yet here I was, following the same path, unable to say no, unable to protect myself from the people I'd given life to. That night, I made myself a simple dinner of soup and toast, eating alone at my kitchen table while the television murmured in the living room. I thought about calling Sarah, telling her I couldn't give her the money. The thought made my heart race with anxiety. What would she say? Would she cry? Would she tell me I didn't love her, didn't care about my grandchildren? The next morning, I went to my bank, a Chase branch I'd been using for 30 years, where the tellers knew my name. The lobby still had that same smell of recycled air and coffee, the same uncomfortable modern chairs that looked stylish but made your back ache after 5 minutes. I sat with a financial advisor, a young woman named Jennifer who couldn't have been more than 35, and showed her my accounts. She pulled up my information on her computer screen, and I watched her face change as she reviewed my transaction history. The regular withdrawals, the emergency transfers, the steady depletion of funds that had once seemed so secure. "Mrs. Patterson," she said gently, her fingers pausing on the keyboard, "at your current rate of withdrawal, you'll deplete your savings within 3 years. 3 years? I was 72. That would make me 75 with nothing left, facing potentially another 15 or 20 years with no financial cushion, no safety net, no ability to handle emergencies or medical expenses or any of the 1,000 small catastrophes that accompany aging." I felt the blood drain from my face. 3 years? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer turned the monitor toward me, showing me a graph. A red line declining steadily, crossing into zero sometime in 2018. Based on your current spending patterns and these regular transfers, yes. And that's assuming no major unexpected expenses. The room felt too small suddenly, too warm. I gripped the armrests of the uncomfortable chair and tried to breathe normally. "What if I stopped making these monthly transfers?" I asked, pointing to the regular $500 payments I sent to Sarah, money she claimed was for helping with the grandkids. Jennifer's face brightened slightly. She typed something, adjusted the graph. "That would extend your runway significantly. You'd have enough to last well into your 80s, possibly longer if you're careful. But Mrs. Patterson, may I ask, are these transfers necessary? Is this a legal obligation of some kind?" Were they necessary? I'd been telling myself they were for so long. Sarah had 7 children. Jake's income was unreliable. They needed help. But necessary? Legal obligation? The questions sounded absurd when someone else asked them. "No," I said slowly. "Not legally. It's my daughter. She's struggling." Jennifer nodded, her face sympathetic but professional. "I see this a lot, Mrs. Patterson. Adult children who rely on their parents' income. It's more common than you might think." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But you're on a fixed income yourself. You can't afford to support another household indefinitely. I don't know anymore, I admitted, staring at that red line on the graph. The trajectory of my financial ruin. I left the bank with printouts of my financial situation, stark numbers that told a story I'd been refusing to read. I drove home through the familiar streets of Chicago, past the coffee shop where Bill and I used to have Sunday breakfast, past the park where I'd pushed my children on swings, past all the landmarks of a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. At home, I made tea and sat in Bill's old armchair, the leather cracked and soft with age. I missed him so much in that moment, it felt like a physical pain. Bill would have known what to do. Bill would have protected me from myself. But Bill was gone, and I was alone with my checkbook and my guilt and my daughter's voice in my head, saying, "Don't think too long." I pulled out my phone and looked at Sarah's last text message, sent 3 days before this pregnancy announcement. It was a photo of Zoe at a dance recital, wearing an elaborate costume. The message read, "Zoe says hi to Grandma. Costume was $300, but she looks beautiful, right?" I hadn't responded. I'd learned that responding to these messages inevitably led to requests for reimbursement, for contributions, for my wallet to open yet again. If I said, "Yes, she looks beautiful," Sarah would write back within minutes. "I know, right? I'm so glad we got it for her. Had to put it on a credit card, though. Any chance you could help with half?" It was a trap I'd fallen into dozens of times before learning to simply not respond. Scrolling back through our text history was like reading a ledger of financial transactions dressed up as family communication. Every message was either asking for money, thanking me for money, or setting up the next ask for money. Jackson needs new cleats for soccer. They're $85 at Dick's Sporting Goods. The dentist says Lily needs braces. Looking at about $4,000? Can you help? Thanks so much for the grocery money, Mom. You're a lifesaver. Marcus wants to go on the school trip to Washington, D.C. It's $650. I hate to ask, but... I scrolled and scrolled, months and months of messages, looking for anything that wasn't about money. A "How are you doing, Mom?" A "Just thinking about you." A "Let's get coffee and catch up." There was nothing. Or almost nothing. There was a Mother's Day message. "Happy Mother's Day to the best mom ever. So grateful for everything you do for us." Even that felt transactional, an investment in keeping me generous. When had it become like this? When had my relationship with my daughter devolved into nothing more than an ATM transaction? I remembered her childhood, the little girl who'd crawled into bed with me during thunderstorms, who'd made me Mother's Day cards with crayon flowers, who'd told me I was her best friend. Where had that girl gone? The truth was, I knew when things had changed. It was when she'd met Jake, when she was 23. He'd seemed charming at first, full of big plans and bigger promises. He was going to start his own business, he said. He was going to make them wealthy, he said. He was going to take care of Sarah and give her everything she deserved. 25 years later, Jake had started and failed at 7 different business ventures, each one requiring seed money that somehow came from me. He'd been employed at 14 different jobs, none lasting more than 2 years, and Sarah, who'd had dreams of becoming a teacher, had instead become a perpetual mother, her life consumed by pregnancy and childcare and the endless chaos of managing a household that could barely afford groceries. I'd enabled it all. Every time I'd given them money, I'd made it possible for them to continue making irresponsible choices. Every time I'd bailed them out, I'd prevented them from facing the natural consequences of their decisions. The realization sat in my stomach like a stone. My phone rang, Sarah's name flashing on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. My hand trembled as I lifted the phone to my ear. "Mom, did you think about what I asked?" "No, hello, no, how are you? Just straight to business." Her voice had that false brightness that I'd learned meant she was preparing for battle. "I'm still thinking," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Well, I really need to know by tomorrow. The furniture sale ends, and I found a second-hand crib on Facebook Marketplace, but the lady says she has other people interested. There it was again, the artificial urgency, the manufactured deadline designed to prevent me from thinking too carefully. Sarah, we need to talk. We are talking, Mom. Impatient now, dismissive. No, I mean really talk. About money, about expectations, about how you don't want to help your own daughter? Her voice had that edge now, the one that made my shoulders tense, that made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. About how you're going to let your grandchildren suffer? The guilt hit me like a wave, as it always did. Images of my grandchildren flashed through my mind. Sweet Lily, with her gap-toothed smile. Little Zoe, who loved to draw pictures for me. But I forced myself to push through the guilt, to say what I needed to say. That's not fair, Sarah. What's not fair is that I'm struggling here, raising 7 kids, about to have 8, and my own mother is acting like I'm asking for the moon. It's $2,000, Mom. You own your house outright. You have money. Do I? The words came out sharper than I intended. Do I really have money, Sarah? Or do I have equity in a house I can't sell without making myself homeless? Do you have any idea what my actual monthly income is? I know you get Dad's pension. I know you have Social Security. I know you're not destitute. And do you know how much of that pension I've been giving to you every month? Do you know that I've been skipping my own medications sometimes because I can't afford them after sending you money? Silence on the other end of the line. But it wasn't the silence of shame or realization. It was the silence of someone preparing their next attack. Did I? Did I really? Or did I have equity trapped in brick and mortar? Equity I couldn't access without selling my home? Equity that would be eaten up by the costs of relocating and starting over somewhere smaller, somewhere lesser, somewhere that wasn't home? I'll call you tomorrow, I said. Fine. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding my phone, feeling the weight of 72 years pressing down on my chest. The house around me felt like a museum to a life I no longer recognized. The photos on the walls showed a family that didn't really exist anymore, or maybe had never existed the way I'd believed it did. I walked to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept Bill's old things. His watch, his wedding ring, a bundle of love letters he'd written me during a summer we'd spent apart before we were married. I pulled out one letter randomly and read his careful handwriting. My dearest Margaret, I can't wait until we're married and I can take care of you forever. You deserve to be cherished, protected, loved without condition. I promise you that every day of our life together, I'll make sure you know how precious you are. Tears blurred the words. Bill had kept that promise. Even after he died, he'd tried to take care of me, leaving me his life insurance, his pension, his love wrapped up in financial security meant to last the rest of my life. And I'd given it all away to a daughter who saw me not as precious, but as a resource to be mined. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I made my coffee, ate my toast, and opened my laptop. I began researching, reading articles about financial abuse by adult children, about elderly exploitation, about the psychology of family manipulation. The statistics horrified me. 1 in 10 Americans over 65 experiences some form of elder abuse, and financial exploitation is the most common type. Children and grandchildren are the most frequent perpetrators. The average victim loses over $120,000. I read article after article, each one describing a situation that felt painfully familiar. Adult children who created emergencies that weren't really emergencies, who guilted their parents with mentions of grandchildren who would suffer without financial help, who used love as a weapon and money as proof of that love. One psychologist's article explained the pattern. Financial abuse by adult children often starts small and escalates gradually. The parent gives willingly at first, wanting to help, but over time, the giving becomes expected, then demanded. The adult child begins to see the parent's resources as their own, and any refusal to share is treated as a personal betrayal. I read that paragraph 3 times, each word landing like a hammer blow. That was exactly what had happened. When had Sarah stopped asking and started expecting? When had my money become her money in her mind? I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a bad mother for feeling used. I found online forums where other elderly parents shared stories that mirrored my own. Adult children who asked for loans that were never repaid. Grandchildren whose education, sports, music lessons, and wardrobes were funded entirely by grandparents living on fixed incomes. Families where the word love had become synonymous with financial transactions. One woman wrote, "I finally realized that my daughter didn't love me. She loved my money. When I stopped giving it to her, she stopped calling. That's when I knew the truth." The words struck me like a physical blow. Was that my truth too? I spent hours reading, absorbing, understanding. I learned about techniques manipulators use: guilt tripping, emotional blackmail, gaslighting, creating false urgencies, exploiting parental love and obligation, isolating their victims from other family members who might intervene. Sarah used all of them, every single one. The false urgencies were constant: the furniture sale that ended tomorrow, the landlord who needed money by Friday, the utility that would be shut off next week. Every request came with a ticking clock. A manufactured crisis designed to prevent me from thinking too clearly or too long. The guilt was her favorite weapon. How can you let your grandchildren suffer? What kind of grandmother refuses to help? Dad would have helped us. That last one cut deep every time, because Bill wasn't here to defend himself, to confirm or deny what he would have done. Sarah had turned my dead husband into a weapon against me. And the gaslighting. When I'd tried to bring up money she'd borrowed and never repaid, she'd looked at me with confused concern and said, "Mom, those were gifts. You said they were gifts. Are you feeling okay? Should we be worried about your memory?" She'd made me doubt my own reality, my own recollection of conversations and agreements. I sat back from my laptop, my tea gone cold in its cup, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like a door closing, a decision solidifying, a line being drawn in sand that had been shifting for too long. I picked up my phone and called my son Michael in Seattle. "Mom?" He sounded surprised. We rarely called each other outside our monthly check-ins. "Is everything okay?" I could hear voices in the background, his family having dinner probably. It would be earlier there, only 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd forgotten about the time difference in my urgency to talk to him. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay." His voice was cautious now. I heard him move, probably stepping into another room for privacy. "Hold on, let me just..." A door closed, muffling the background noise. "Okay, I'm here. What's going on?" "When was the last time Sarah asked you for money?" Silence, the kind of heavy silence that speaks volumes. Then, "Mom, I don't want to get involved in whatever's going on between you two." "Michael, please, I need to know." My voice cracked slightly. "I'm trying to understand something, and I need your help." He sighed, long and deep. I could picture him running his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. "She stopped asking me about 10 years ago. I told her no once, told her I had my own family to support and my own bills, and she got really angry. We didn't speak for almost a year. After that, she only called on holidays and birthdays, and the conversations were always cold, always short. I figured she'd written me off because I wasn't useful to her anymore." "You told her no once," I repeated slowly. "Just once, and she cut you out?" "Pretty much, yeah. I mean, she didn't say that's what she was doing, but it was obvious. Before I said no, she used to call all the time. Text me updates about the kids, send photos. After I said no, it all stopped. Like a switch had been flipped. The words confirmed what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. Sarah had a pattern. She identified who would give her money and who wouldn't, and she cultivated relationships accordingly. Has she ever asked you about my finances? I asked. Another pause. Yeah, actually, a few years ago. She asked me if I thought you were okay for money, if I thought you'd need help in your old age. I told her you seemed fine, that you owned your house and had Dad's pension. She seemed really interested in knowing the details. I thought it was weird at the time, but I didn't think much of it. We talked for another hour, the longest conversation I'd had with my son in years. He told me he'd pulled away from Sarah because he couldn't stand watching her manipulate me, couldn't bear to see me being used and to feel powerless to stop it. I tried to tell you once, he said. Do you remember? About 6 years ago, I said I thought Sarah was taking advantage of your generosity. You got so upset with me. You said I was jealous, that I was trying to turn you against your daughter. We didn't talk for 2 months after that. I did remember. I'd been so angry at Michael, so defensive of Sarah. Now I understood what he'd been trying to do. He'd been trying to protect me, and I'd pushed him away for it. I'm sorry, I told him. I should have listened. It's okay, Mom, I understand. She's good at what she does. She knows how to make you feel guilty, how to make you feel like you're the bad guy if you don't help. After we hung up, I sat with this new understanding. Sarah hadn't just been using me. She'd been systematically managing my relationships with other family members, isolating me from Michael, keeping me dependent on her as my primary family connection, while simultaneously exploiting that connection for financial gain. It was brilliant, in a horrible way, and it had worked for years. That afternoon, Sarah called again. Mom, I need an answer about the money. No, I said. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd never learned. What? She sounded genuinely shocked. No, Sarah, I'm not giving you $2,000 for baby furniture. Mom, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that I've given you over $60,000 in the past 15 years. I understand that you've never paid me back a single cent. I understand that my bank account is nearly empty while you're having your 8th child with a man who can't hold down a job. How dare you? How dare I what? How dare I finally stand up for myself? How dare I stop letting you drain me dry? You're my mother. You're supposed to help me. I have helped you. For 25 years, I've helped you. I've given you money I couldn't afford to give. I've sacrificed my own financial security for you. And it's never enough. It's never been enough. She was crying now, or pretending to cry. I'd learned I couldn't always tell the difference. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I can't believe you're choosing money over your own daughter and grandchildren. I'm not choosing money over you. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in decades, I'm choosing to take care of myself. Fine, fine. Don't help us. But don't expect us to be around when you need help someday. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old and sick and alone. The threat hung in the air. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Sarah, you're not taking care of me now. You call when you need money. That's our entire relationship, so I'm not losing anything except the privilege of being your ATM. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Sarah didn't call, neither did any of the grandchildren. I checked my phone obsessively, torn between relief and anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on Sunday morning. I was at Sacred Heart Church, the same church I'd attended for 40 years, sitting in my usual pew in the middle section on the right side. Father Thomas gave a sermon about forgiveness and family obligations, and I felt every word like an accusation. After the service, I was heading to my car when I heard my name called. It was Margaret Chen, a woman I'd known casually through the church for years. She was about my age, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by a large, devoted family. Margaret Patterson, do you have a moment? She asked. We stood in the parking lot, the October wind rustling the leaves of the old oak trees that lined the church property. The air smelled like autumn, That particular combination of dry leaves and coming rain. Mrs. Chen pulled her coat tighter around herself. I heard about your situation with your daughter, Mrs. Chen said, her voice gentle but direct. I wanted to tell you that you did the right thing. I stared at her, embarrassment flooding through me. How did you? Sarah called my daughter-in-law yesterday. She was looking for someone to talk to, I think, or maybe looking for someone to convince you to change your mind. My daughter-in-law told me about it, and I wanted you to know that you're not alone. My face burned. Sarah had been calling people from church, spreading her version of events, painting me as the villain. What did she say? I asked, not sure I wanted to know. It doesn't matter, Mrs. Chen said firmly. What matters is that you protected yourself. That takes courage. She proceeded to tell me her own story. 15 years ago, her son had been addicted to gambling. He'd borrowed money from her repeatedly, always promising to pay it back, always claiming it was for legitimate expenses. She'd given him nearly $100,000 over 5 years before discovering that every cent had gone to casinos and online poker. I found out by accident, she continued, her eyes distant with the memory. I went to visit him, let myself in with the key he'd given me for emergencies. There were collection notices everywhere. Credit card bills showing cash advances at casinos, a letter from his bank about his overdrawn account. And I realized that all my money I'd worked 40 years to save, had been feeding his addiction. I thought I was helping him, she said. I thought I was being a good mother, but I was enabling him. I was making it possible for him to avoid facing his addiction. When I finally stopped, when I finally said no, he didn't speak to me for 3 years. 3 years, Margaret. It nearly killed me. What happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The first year was the worst. He called me names I'd never heard him use before. Told me I was a terrible mother, that I'd abandoned him when he needed me most. He told other family members that I'd cut him off out of spite, that I was hoarding money while he suffered. Some of them believed him. I lost friends over it, people from church who thought I was being cruel. Mrs. Chen's voice wavered slightly, but she continued. The second year, he stopped calling entirely. I didn't know where he was, if he was alive or dead. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, terrified that I'd get a call from the police telling me they'd found his body. The guilt was suffocating. How did you bear it? I asked. Prayer, she said simply, and therapy, and the support of the few people who understood what I was doing. My husband stood by me, thank God. He kept reminding me that loving someone doesn't mean destroying yourself to save them. She looked at me directly. He hit rock bottom, lost his apartment, lost his car, lost everything. And finally, he got help. He went to Gamblers Anonymous, got a sponsor, started rebuilding his life. Now he's been clean for 10 years, has a good job, owns his own home, and he thanks me for cutting him off. He says it saved his life. He really said that? I asked, desperate for hope. He did. Last Thanksgiving, he stood up in front of the whole family and thanked me. He said, Mom, when you stopped giving me money, I hated you. I thought you didn't love me anymore, but you loved me enough to let me fail, and that failure saved my life. Tears streamed down my face. Mrs. Chen reached out and took my hand. Her story gave me hope, but also fear. 3 years of not speaking to her son. Could I survive 3 years without Sarah, without the grandchildren? It's hard, Mrs. Chen said, reading my thoughts. The hardest thing I've ever done. But you know what I learned? Real love isn't about giving people what they want. It's about giving them what they need, even when they hate you for it. We stood there in the parking lot for a while longer. 2 elderly women who'd lived long enough to learn that motherhood doesn't end when your children grow up. Sometimes it gets even harder. Father Thomas approached us as Mrs. Chen was leaving. He was in his 60s, a kind man with gentle eyes who'd presided over Bill's funeral. Margaret, may I speak with you for a moment? He asked. We sat on a bench under one of the oak trees. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've noticed you seem troubled lately, more than usual. Would you like to talk about it?" Something about his directness, his genuine concern, broke through my defenses. I told him everything. The money, the manipulation, the phone call where I'd finally said no. I told him about my fear, my guilt, my certainty that I was a terrible mother and grandmother. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded in his lap, his face thoughtful. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, Margaret, Jesus said to love your neighbor as yourself, not instead of yourself. As yourself. That means you have an obligation to love yourself, to care for yourself, to protect yourself from harm, even when that harm comes from family. But the Bible says to honor your father and mother, to take care of family. It also says that a parent's job is to leave an inheritance for their children, not to be a burden to them. It says children should care for their aging parents, not the other way around. At some point, the roles are supposed to reverse. Your daughter is 48 years old. You don't owe her your life savings." His words settled over me like a blessing. Here was a religious authority, a spiritual leader, telling me that I wasn't sinning by protecting myself. I wasn't failing at being a good Christian by setting boundaries. "What should I do now?" I asked. "Pray," he said simply. "And then do what you know is right, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard. God doesn't call us to be doormats. He calls us to be good stewards of what we've been given, including our own well-being." I left the church that day feeling lighter, more certain. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home and bought ingredients for a real meal, not just soup and toast. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen table. I bought a book I'd been wanting to read, but had told myself was too expensive. At the checkout, the total came to $73. 2 months ago, I would have felt guilty about spending that much on myself. Today, I felt like I was making a down payment on my future. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began making a plan. I opened a spreadsheet and started tracking my actual expenses versus my income. I calculated what I needed for property taxes, utilities, food, medical expenses. I looked at my pension, my Social Security, the small interest from my savings. Without the $500 a month I'd been giving Sarah, without the emergency payments every few weeks, I could live comfortably. Not lavishly, but comfortably. I could even save a little each month, rebuild the cushion I'd depleted. I made another list too. Things I wanted to do, places I wanted to visit, a trip to see Michael in Seattle. Maybe a cruise I'd been dreaming about for years. A new computer to replace my ancient laptop. Small luxuries I'd denied myself while funding my daughter's lifestyle. The more I wrote, the more I realized how small my life had become. How I'd shrunk myself, my wants, my needs, my dreams, to make room for Sarah's endless demands. No more. Monday morning, I called my bank and asked them to stop the automatic monthly transfer to Sarah's account. The representative processed it immediately, and I felt a surge of power I hadn't experienced in years. I was taking control of my own life. Sarah called that afternoon, her voice icy. The money didn't go through. "I know. I canceled the transfer." "You what?" "I canceled it. All of it. I'm not giving you any more money, Sarah. Not monthly payments, not emergency loans, not anything." "Mom, I have bills to pay." "So do I. And unlike you, I don't have anyone else to fall back on. I'm 72 years old, Sarah. I need to make my money last the rest of my life. I can't keep supporting you." "This is unbelievable. You're really going to abandon your family?" "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not financing your choices anymore." She launched into a tirade. I was selfish. I was cruel. I didn't love my grandchildren. What would people think? What would the family say? I let her rant, holding the phone away from my ear slightly, waiting for her to run out of steam. When she finally paused for breath, I said calmly, Are you finished? Fuck you, Mom. She'd never spoken to me that way before. Or maybe she had in softer words, in guilt trips and manipulations. This was just the mask finally coming off. I love you, Sarah, I said. But I'm done being your bank. If you want a relationship with me that isn't about money, I'm here. But I won't give you another dollar. I hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. No calls from Sarah, no texts from the grandchildren, no family drama in my voicemail. I was alone, but I was also, for the first time in years, at peace. The days turned into weeks. I fell into a new routine. Morning coffee on my small back porch, watching the birds at the feeder I'd installed. Afternoon walks through Lincoln Park. Evening phone calls with Michael, who seemed delighted to have me back in his life in a real way. I joined a senior center book club, something I'd always wanted to do but had never had time for, because I was always dealing with Sarah's latest crisis. The first meeting I attended, we were discussing little fires everywhere, and I found myself opening up about my own situation during our discussion of parental sacrifice. I met women my own age who had their own stories, their own struggles, their own hard-won wisdom. One woman, Patricia, had also cut off a financially abusive adult son. She'd been a teacher for 35 years, had saved diligently for retirement, and had watched her son drain $70,000 from her account over a decade. He was my only child, she told me over coffee after book club one day. I kept thinking if I just helped him one more time, he'd turn things around. But there was always one more time, one more crisis, one more emergency. Another, Linda, was dealing with a daughter who'd stolen her identity and racked up credit card debt in her name. I didn't find out until a collection agency called me, she said. My own daughter had taken out 5 credit cards using my Social Security number. The debt was over $30,000. And when I confronted her, she cried and said she'd only done it because I wouldn't give her the money she needed. What did you do? I asked. I pressed charges, Linda said flatly. Hardest thing I've ever done. She was arrested, pled guilty, got probation. She hasn't spoken to me since. But you know what? My credit is recovering, and I can sleep at night knowing I didn't let her destroy both our lives. We weren't alone, any of us. We were survivors. And more than that, we were becoming advocates for ourselves, learning that loving your children doesn't mean letting them consume you. I started sleeping better. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for years began to dissolve. I didn't wake up at 3 a.m. anymore, worrying about Sarah's problems, worrying about money, worrying about being a bad mother. I was learning that being a good mother didn't mean sacrificing myself on the altar of my children's wants. 6 weeks after my last conversation with Sarah, I got a text from Emma, my oldest grandchild. She was 26 now, married, living her own life. Grandma, can we talk? We met for coffee at a small cafe in Wicker Park. The place was trendy and modern, with exposed brick walls and the smell of expensive espresso in the air. So different from the simple diners Bill and I used to frequent. Emma looked tired, but she hugged me warmly when she arrived, and I felt tears prick my eyes at the simple gesture of affection with no agenda behind it. I wanted to apologize, she said once we'd ordered. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, not meeting my eyes at first, for not reaching out sooner, for not seeing what was happening. What do you mean? I asked carefully. Mom's been telling everyone that you cut her off, that you're being unreasonable, that you don't care about the family anymore. But I talked to Uncle Michael, and he told me what's really been going on. How much money you've given over the years. How you've been struggling. Emma finally looked up at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. Grandma, I had no idea. I mean, I knew Mom asked you for money sometimes, but I didn't realize it was constant. I didn't realize it was everything. It's not your fault, I said automatically. No, but I should have paid more attention. I'm 26 years old, not a child. I should have noticed that you never bought yourself anything new, that your house was falling into disrepair, that you looked stressed every time Mom brought up money." She wiped at her eyes. "I was so caught up in my own life, and I just assumed you were fine because you always said you were fine. I didn't know what to say." Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I knew Mom was always asking you for money, but I didn't realize how much. I didn't realize you were hurting yourself to help us. That's not okay." Tears filled my eyes. "You don't think I'm a bad grandmother?" "No, God, no. I think you're finally taking care of yourself, and I think that's amazing. You should have done it years ago." We talked for 2 hours. Emma told me that Sarah had tried to get other family members to intervene, to pressure me into resuming the money flow, but one by one they'd declined. Some, like Michael, because they thought I was doing the right thing. Others, like Sarah's in-laws, because they were tired of funding Sarah and Jake's irresponsibility too. "She's panicking," Emma said. "She and Dad are going to have to actually budget, actually make hard choices. It's going to be good for them, even if they can't see it now." "What about you?" I asked. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Emma smiled. "I'm fine, Grandma. I have a good job, a good husband. We're doing well. And honestly, watching Mom's relationship with money has taught me exactly what not to do. I would never put that kind of pressure on someone I love." Before we parted, Emma hugged me again and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words meant more to me than years of Sarah's thank you texts. That night, I allowed myself to think about the future in a way I hadn't in years. I thought about traveling, about hobbies, about friends, about all the things I'd put on hold while I was busy being Sarah's safety net. I pulled out a notebook and started making plans, real plans, with dates and budgets and concrete steps. First, I was going to visit Michael in Seattle. I'd never seen his house, never spent real time with his wife and kids. That was going to change. Then, I wanted to take that cruise I'd been dreaming about. Maybe to Alaska, or the Caribbean, or the Mediterranean. Somewhere beautiful, somewhere I could see new things and meet new people, and remember what it felt like to be excited about life. I wanted to update my wardrobe. I'd been wearing the same clothes for years, buying nothing new because I couldn't justify the expense when Sarah needed help. I wanted to fix things in my house that I'd been ignoring. The leaky faucet in the bathroom, the crack in the living room ceiling, the garden that had become overgrown because I'd been too stressed to tend it. Small things, maybe, but they were my things, my wants, my life. The next day, I went to a travel agency, something I hadn't done in decades. The young woman behind the counter was enthusiastic and helpful, showing me cruise options, explaining different packages, helping me understand what I could afford. I booked a 7-day Alaskan cruise for the following summer. It cost $3,800, which would have sent me into panic mode a few months ago. Now, I saw it as an investment in myself, in experiences I'd denied myself for too long. Walking out of the travel agency with my confirmation documents, I felt younger than I had in years. That night, Sarah texted me. It was the first contact in 6 weeks. "Mom, we need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit there while I made dinner, while I ate at my newly flowered kitchen table, while I watched the evening news. Finally, I texted back, "About what?" "About this situation. About the family. About how we move forward. I'm willing to have a relationship with you that isn't about money. That's not fair. I'm struggling here, and you're off living your best life while your grandchildren suffer." I almost laughed. Living my best life. I was still driving a 12-year-old car, living in a house that needed updates, wearing clothes from Target. But compared to my life when I was funding Sarah's every whim, yes, I was living my best life. "Your financial situation is not my responsibility," I texted back. "You and Jake are adults. You made the choice to have 8 children. I love you and I love my grandchildren. But I will not sacrifice my financial security for your choices. Wow, just wow. I hope you enjoy your money because you're losing your family over it. I'm not losing my family. I'm setting boundaries. If you can't accept that, then we have bigger problems than money. She didn't respond. I went to bed that night and slept soundly, without guilt, without anxiety, without the weight of Sarah's expectations pressing down on my chest. I was learning to let go. The weeks continued to pass. Thanksgiving was coming, and I braced myself for the awkwardness. For years I'd hosted Thanksgiving dinner, cooking for Sarah's entire family, plus Michael when he could make it. This year I decided to do something different. I invited Michael and his family to fly to Chicago, and I told them we were going out for Thanksgiving dinner at a nice restaurant. No cooking, no cleaning, no stress. Just good food and family time. Sarah found out through Emma and called me, furious. "You're really not hosting Thanksgiving?" "No, I'm not." "What are we supposed to do?" "I assume you'll make your own plans, like millions of other families do." "I can't afford to cook Thanksgiving dinner for 10 people. "Then don't. Make something simple, or go to a food bank, or ask Jake's family to contribute. But I'm not hosting. This is so selfish." "Maybe it is, but I'm allowed to be a little selfish sometimes." She hung up on me. Thanksgiving came, and I met Michael and his family at a beautiful restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. His wife Jennifer was lovely and warm. His kids, my West Coast grandchildren I barely knew, were polite and funny and engaging. We ate roasted turkey and sweet potatoes and pumpkin pie, and we talked about everything except Sarah. We laughed, we told stories, we made memories. At the end of the meal, Michael raised his glass of wine and said, "To Mom, for finally putting herself first." We clinked glasses, and I felt tears of happiness for the first time in longer than I could remember. That night, I got a group text from Sarah. It was a photo of her family at their Thanksgiving table, everyone smiling, the table laden with food. The message read, "Grateful for family who actually shows up." The dig was obvious, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt free. Emma texted me privately, "Don't let her get to you. She ordered most of that food from a charity program and is acting like she pulled off a miracle." I appreciated Emma's honesty, but I realized I didn't even care. Sarah's life wasn't my responsibility anymore. Her choices, her consequences, her problems to solve. December brought new challenges. Christmas was traditionally an expensive time, with gifts for all 7 grandchildren plus Sarah and Jake. I'd usually spent over $1,000 trying to make sure everyone was happy. This year, I sent cards with $50 each to the grandchildren and nothing to Sarah or Jake. I also sent a card to Michael's kids with the same amount. Equal treatment, reasonable amounts, no stress. I used the money I'd saved to buy myself something I'd wanted for years, a new camera. A really nice one, with interchangeable lenses and all the features I'd need to pursue photography, a hobby I'd loved before I'd gotten too busy and too broke to maintain it. On Christmas morning, I didn't wake up stressed and exhausted from wrapping presents and preparing a feast. I woke up peacefully, made myself a special breakfast, and took my new camera out for a walk through snowy Lincoln Park, capturing the winter beauty I'd been too preoccupied to notice for years. Sarah called that afternoon, her voice dripping with false cheer. "Merry Christmas, Mom. The kids wanted to thank you for the cards." "You're welcome. Merry Christmas to you too." "Are you coming over later?" "No, I have other plans." "Other plans? What other plans?" "I'm spending the day by myself, doing things I enjoy." Silence. Then, "You're spending Christmas alone?" "By choice, yes." More silence. I could hear the wheels turning, trying to figure out how to make me feel guilty about this. "Well, that's sad," she finally said. "Really sad." "Actually, it's peaceful. I hope you have a lovely day with your family." I hung up before she could respond. The truth was, I wasn't entirely alone. I'd made plans to video chat with Michael's family later that afternoon. But even if I had been completely alone, it would have been better than spending the day being Sarah's bank and servant. I was learning to choose peace over performance. January came with a shock. I was sorting through my mail when I found an envelope from Sarah. Inside was a formal-looking document. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a bill, an actual, itemized bill for emotional support services and family management duties provided over the past year. The total was $5,200. I stared at it in disbelief. She was billing me for being her mother. The audacity was breathtaking. Also included was a note. Since you've decided our relationship should be purely transactional, I'm treating it as such. This represents a fraction of what I've provided to you in terms of family coordination and emotional labor. Payment is expected within 30 days. I should have been angry. Instead, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh that started in my belly and burst out of me in waves. It was so absurd, so desperate, so perfectly Sarah. I took a photo of the bill and texted it to Michael with the caption, "Your sister has truly outdone herself." His response was immediate. "Is she serious?" "Apparently." "Don't pay it, Mom. It's not even legally binding. She's just trying to manipulate you again." I knew that, but part of me wanted to respond, wanted to tell her exactly how ridiculous she was being. Instead, I did something better. I wrote her a letter, an actual, handwritten letter on my good stationery. "Dear Sarah, I received your bill for emotional support services. I want you to know that I will not be paying it. However, since we're apparently itemizing family relationships now, I've done some calculations of my own. Rent, mortgage assistance over 25 years, $89,000 car payments and insurance, $23,000 medical bills, $12,000 grocery and utility assistance, $31,000 gifts and holiday expenses, $18,000 various emergencies, $47,000 total, $220,000. I'm not asking you to pay this back. I gave this money freely because I loved you and wanted to help you. But I want you to understand what you've received and what you're throwing away by reducing our relationship to a transaction. I love you, Sarah. I always will. But I will not be manipulated anymore. When you're ready to have a real relationship with me, one based on love and respect rather than money, I'll be here. Until then, I wish you well. Mom." I mailed the letter and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd said what needed to be said, calmly and clearly, with no room for misinterpretation. Sarah didn't respond, not to the letter, not with calls or texts. She went completely silent. And slowly, surprisingly, I found that I was okay with that. February brought an unexpected development. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Jake, Sarah's husband, alone for once. He looked terrible. He'd aged a decade in the few months since I'd last seen him, his face gaunt, his shoulders slumped. His clothes hung on him differently, like he'd lost weight. The cocky swagger I'd always associated with him was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Margaret," he said, seeming genuinely glad to see me. "How are you?" There was something different in his voice. No false cheerfulness, no attempt to charm me, just genuine inquiry, maybe even concern. "I'm well, Jake. How are you?" He glanced around as if checking whether anyone could hear us. His shopping cart contained store-brand items, the cheapest versions of everything. I remembered when Sarah used to show me photos of their grocery hauls, all name brands, all premium products. All purchased, I now realized, with my money. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" We moved to the coffee area of the store and sat down at one of the small tables. Jake fidgeted with his hands, clasping and unclasping them, clearly struggling with what to say. "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "For everything. For all the years of taking your money. For letting Sarah pressure you. For not being a better provider for my family." I was stunned. In 23 years of knowing Jake, I'd never heard him take responsibility for anything. It was always bad luck, unfair bosses, unexpected circumstances. Never his fault. Jake. No. Let me finish, please. He looked at me directly for the first time. I've been thinking a lot since you cut us off. At first I was angry, same as Sarah. I blamed you. I thought you were being selfish, that you didn't care about your grandkids. But then I started really looking at our life, our choices. We've been living above our means for years, always counting on you to bail us out. And that's not fair. It's not right. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly. I made a list of every time we asked you for money over the past 5 years, just the ones I could remember. It came to over $40,000. 40,000, Margaret. And that's not even including the monthly payments Sarah said you'd agreed to. What changed? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I hit bottom, he said simply. We were about to lose the house. I was going to ask you for help, but Sarah said you'd refuse. So instead, I did something I should have done years ago. I went to a financial counselor at Catholic Charities. Free counseling, can you believe it? All this time we could have gotten help for free, but we were too proud, too ashamed to admit we didn't know what we were doing. He shook his head. The counselor sat down with me and Sarah and made us list every source of income and every expense. And when we couldn't include your money anymore, the numbers didn't add up. Not even close. We were spending $300 more than we earned every single month, and that's with me working 2 jobs now. Started looking at our actual income and expenses, realized we've been living in fantasy land. He pulled out his phone and showed me a budget spreadsheet. It was detailed, realistic, and didn't include any income from me. We're making it work, he said. Barely, but we're doing it. I got a second job. Sarah's started doing childcare for other families to bring in extra money. We're not eating out, not buying unnecessary things, not taking vacations, and it's hard, but we're doing it. That's good, Jake. I'm proud of you. I wanted you to know that I get it now. I understand why you had to stop. And I'm sorry it took us losing your support to figure out how to support ourselves. We talked for a while longer. He told me about his new job as a night security guard, how exhausting it was to work 2 jobs, but also how good it felt to actually provide for his family. He told me that Sarah was struggling with the adjustment, angry and resentful, but that he was insisting they stick to the budget. I think she's mad at me now instead of you, he said with a wry smile, but that's probably healthier anyway. As we parted, he hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for doing what we couldn't do for ourselves." I drove home thoughtful. Maybe my cutting them off really was helping, not in the way I'd intended, but in a real sustainable way. Spring arrived, and with it came the trip to Seattle to visit Michael. I packed my bags with excitement I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a duty visit. This was pleasure, adventure, reconnection. Seattle was beautiful, rainy and green and full of life. The plane ride had been my first in 8 years, since I'd stopped being able to afford travel. I'd forgotten the thrill of takeoff, the wonder of seeing the world from above. I'd sat by the window and watched Chicago shrink below me, feeling like I was leaving more than just a city behind. Michael met me at the airport with his whole family. His kids, teenagers now, were polite and curious, asking me questions about my flight, about Chicago, actually seeming interested in my answers. His wife Jennifer hugged me like she meant it. Michael's house was lovely, his family warm and welcoming. We spent a week hiking through green forests that smelled of pine and rain, visiting museums where I could take my time appreciating art without worrying about the cost of admission, cooking together in his beautiful kitchen where everyone helped and no one expected me to do everything. We talked about everything and nothing, books and politics and family history. We laughed. We shared memories of Bill. We made new memories. One evening, sitting on his back deck overlooking Puget Sound, the water gray and peaceful in the fading light, Michael said, "You seem different, Mom. Lighter." I thought about it, watching a ferry cross the Sound. I feel different, I admitted. I feel like myself again. Like I got lost somewhere along the way and I'm finally finding my way back. Or maybe I'm finding a new version of myself. Someone who exists outside of being Sarah's mother, Sarah's safety net, Sarah's bank. I'm glad you cut Sarah off, he said. I know that sounds harsh, but watching what she was doing to you, it was killing me. I felt so helpless. You tried to tell me. Yeah, but you weren't ready to hear it. Nobody can make that decision for you. You had to get there yourself. I wish I'd gotten there sooner. I wish I hadn't wasted so many years, so much money. It's not wasted if you learned from it. And look at you now. You're traveling, you're happy, you're living your life. That's not nothing. He was right. I was 62 when Bill died. I'd spent the next 10 years as Sarah's ATM. I was 72 now, but I probably had another 15 or 20 good years ahead of me. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. On my last night in Seattle, Michael handed me an envelope. What's this? Open it. Inside were photos, lots of them. Pictures of me with Michael and his family over the past week. Pictures I didn't even know had been taken. Pictures of me laughing, of me looking at art in a museum, of me holding my Seattle grandchildren with genuine joy on my face. I wanted you to have these, Michael said, so you remember what happiness looks like on you. I cried, but they were good tears. Back home in Chicago, I returned to my new routines: book club, photography walks, regular phone calls with Michael, occasional coffee dates with Emma. My life wasn't empty or lonely. It was full of things I'd chosen, relationships I valued, activities that brought me joy. I was whole. In late spring, I got an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, planting tomatoes and herbs, my hands in the dark soil, feeling the earth warm under the May sun. The garden had become my meditation, my therapy. Each plant I nurtured felt like I was nurturing myself, giving myself the care and attention I'd been denying myself for years. I heard the gate creak. I looked up to see Sarah standing there, alone, no children with her, no distractions or deflections. She was very pregnant now, her belly round and low, maybe 7 months along. She looked different. Older, but also somehow more solid, less frantic. She was wearing simple clothes, nothing designer, nothing I recognized as something I'd paid for. Her face was bare of makeup, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. But also something else, something that might have been humility. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly, her hands resting on her belly in a gesture that looked protective rather than performative. "Hi, Sarah." I stayed kneeling in the garden, not getting up, not rushing to make her comfortable. I'd learned to let silence exist without filling it. "Can we talk?" I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. "All right." We sat on my back porch, the same porch where I'd had my coffee every morning since reclaiming my life. I didn't offer her anything to drink. I just waited, watching a robin hop across my newly green lawn. "I've been in therapy," she said finally. Jake insisted, said our marriage was in trouble and we needed help. The therapist wanted to talk about money, about family patterns, about dependence and boundaries. "Okay." She made me look at how I've treated you, really look at it. "And Mom, I'm so sorry." I waited. I'd heard apologies from Sarah before, usually followed by asks for money. "I've been using you," she continued, "for years, decades. I told myself it was okay because you were my mom and moms are supposed to help their kids. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person. I just saw you as a resource." Tears were running down her face now. Real tears, I thought, not the manipulative kind. "When you cut me off, I was so angry. I felt betrayed. But slowly, I started to see that you were right. Jake and I had to figure out how to actually support ourselves. We had to grow up, and it's been hard, but we're doing it." "I'm glad," I said. "I don't expect you to start giving me money again," she said quickly. "That's not why I'm here. I just wanted to tell you that I understand now, and I'm sorry. For all of it. For treating you like an ATM. For guilting you. For not appreciating everything you did for us. For not being a real daughter to you. We sat in silence for a long moment. I'd like to try again, Sarah said. To have a real relationship with you. No money involved. Just mother and daughter. If you're willing to give me another chance. I looked at her. This middle-aged woman who was my daughter, who I'd carried and birthed and raised and loved and enabled, and finally freed. I'd like that too, I said. But Sarah, we have to start from scratch. We have to build something new. The old relationship was too broken to fix. I know. And if you ask me for money again, I'm done. Permanently. Do you understand? I understand. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But we talked for an hour, really talked, about her life and mine, about the grandchildren and her therapy and my travels. It was awkward sometimes, stilted sometimes, but it was real. When she left, she said, "Can I call you next week, just to talk?" I'd like that. She did call, and the week after that, and slowly, carefully, we began building something new. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I could tell she wanted to ask for money and had to stop herself. There were moments when I waited for the manipulation to start and was surprised when it didn't. But bit by bit, we made progress. Summer came, and with it, my Alaskan cruise. I sailed through glacial waters, saw whales and eagles and ice formations that took my breath away. I made friends with other solo travelers, women my age, who were also reclaiming their lives and their freedom. I posted photos to a Facebook account I'd created, sharing my adventures. Emma commented enthusiastically. Michael did too. Even Sarah left a few beautiful comments that seemed genuine. When I got home, I had an envelope waiting for me. It was from Sarah. Inside was a card and a check for $500. The card read, "I know this doesn't begin to make up for what I've taken from you over the years, but it's a start. I got a raise at the daycare, and I want you to have this, not as payback exactly, but as a symbol. I'm standing on my own feet now. Thank you for making me learn how. Love, Sarah." I stared at the check for a long time. $500. Nothing compared to what I'd given her, but everything in terms of what it represented. I deposited the check and used it to book another cruise for the following year. Fall arrived again, a year since I'd said that first no to Sarah. I was asked to speak at a senior center about financial boundaries with adult children. Apparently, word had spread about my story through church connections and the book club. I stood in front of a room of 40 people, mostly women my age, and told them what I'd learned. "You're not a bad parent for setting boundaries," I said. "You're not selfish for protecting your financial security. You don't owe your adult children unlimited support, unlimited chances, unlimited access to your resources." I saw heads nodding, tears in some eyes. I lost 10 years and over $200,000 learning this lesson. Don't make my mistake. Love your children, but love yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you shouldn't have to. After my talk, women came up to me, sharing their own stories. One woman had refinanced her house 3 times to help her son, and now at 78 was facing foreclosure. Another had given her daughter power of attorney and discovered her savings account had been emptied. Story after story of love twisted into exploitation. But there were also stories of hope. Women who'd set boundaries and survived. Women who'd rebuilt relationships with their children on healthier foundations. Women who'd chosen themselves and discovered they hadn't lost their families, they'd just redefined them. I left that day feeling like I'd found my purpose. If sharing my story could help even one person avoid my mistakes, it would be worth it. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner for the first time in 2 years, but this time, it was different. Sarah and Jake came, but they brought dishes and helped cook. Michael and his family flew in and stayed with me, filling my house with laughter. Emma and her husband came too. We sat around my table, the table where I'd eaten so many lonely meals, and we gave thanks. For family, yes, but also for boundaries, for healing, for second chances, for the courage to change. Sarah stood up at one point and raised her glass. "To Mom," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "For loving me enough to stop enabling me, for being brave enough to save yourself. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what you were trying to teach me." We clinked glasses, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but acceptance, understanding, peace. The past year had taught me so much. I'd learned that family love doesn't have to mean financial sacrifice. I'd learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their own choices. I'd learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life, your money, your peace of mind. I'd learned that I was stronger than I thought, braver than I believed, more resilient than I'd imagined. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't measured by how much I gave away, but by how much I valued myself. As I looked around my table at my family, complicated and imperfect, and finally on the road to healing, I felt grateful. Not for the years of exploitation, but for the wisdom that came from finally saying no, for the freedom that came from choosing myself, for the rebirth that came from letting the old toxic patterns die. I was 73 years old. I had money in the bank again. I had a cruise booked for next spring. I had my photography hobby and my book club and my friendships. I had a daughter who was learning to stand on her own and a son who respected me more than ever. I had my dignity back. I had my life back. And that was worth more than all the money I'd given away, all the years I'd lost, all the pain I'd endured. Because now, finally, I was free. Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle of giving to family members who take without appreciation? Have you watched someone you love drain themselves dry, trying to make ungrateful relatives happy? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story spoke to you, if it helped you see your own situation more clearly, please like and subscribe. These stories need to reach people who feel alone in their struggle, who think they're the only ones dealing with financial exploitation by family. Your engagement helps me spread this message to those who need it most. Thank you for listening to my story.